Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The Chinese Coast Guard is behaving like pirates in the South China Sea. This week, they bullied Filipino soldiers, they boarded their vessel without permission, they smashed the boat's equipment, and they threatened the Filipino soldiers with knives and spears. China's bullying in the South China Sea is once again raising the risk of conflict. Meanwhile, in Israel, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, has issued a significant statement. They say it is impossible to completely eliminate the Hamas. In India, students are outraged after yet another key exam was cancelled because of a paper leak. After North Korea, Vladimir Putin has reached Vietnam. We'll tell you what's on his agenda. After sponsoring terrorists for years, Pakistan is complaining about terrorism at the United Nations. The heat wave has taken more than 1,000 lives during the Hajj, and why scientists in Antarctica are developing a new language. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other American lawmakers. It comes a day after they met the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. Pelosi launched a blistering attack on the Chinese president after meeting the Tibetan spiritual leader. Beijing had expressed strong objections over this visit. In India, relief for Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. He gets bail in the now scrapped liquor policy case. In the month of March, Kejriwal was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate. He is accused of money laundering. In May, the Supreme Court had granted him bail to campaign for the election. The Bank of England opts against cutting the interest rate before the election, keeps it at a 16-year high of 5.2%. This is despite inflation easing in the UK. But the Swiss National Bank announces its second straight interest rate cut. In March, it became the first Western central bank to slash borrowing costs. Ecuador suffers a nationwide power outage for several hours. Around 18 million people left in the dark due to an electrical grid failure. The blackout cripples metro services and road traffic. In recent months, Ecuadorians have had to deal with planned power cuts of up to 13 hours at a time. Outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to become the next head of NATO. His sole challenger, the Romanian president, pulled out of the race. Rutte will assume charge at a crucial time for the alliance. As the Ukraine war drags on, the current NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg's term ends on the 1st of October. And French hotels sue Airbnb for unfair trade practices. More than 24 hotels are seeking $10 million in damages. They claim that the US-based platform does not collect or pay tourist taxes. It is the most dangerous escalation in the South China Sea so far. What you just saw happened on Monday. Chinese sailors crossed a line and launched an unprecedented attack, the kind that could easily trigger a conflict. Let's look at those pictures again. That's a Philippine Navy vessel at the center, surrounded by the Chinese Coast Guard. You can see a Chinese soldier in an orange life jacket. He's threatening the Philippine Navy officer with an axe. There is another Chinese soldier behind him, and he seems to be wielding a sword. And from here, the situation deteriorated. Chinese troops deployed tear gas. They hurled rocks. They blared sirens and strobe lights. Some Chinese troops boarded the Philippine boat and they destroyed it. The boat's equipment was smashed. The Chinese troops punctured the rubber boat. They took away phones and rifles of Filipino personnel. It was excessive and brutal. 8 Philippine officers were injured. One of them suffered serious injuries. He lost his right thumb. The confrontation happened in this region, near the second Thomas Shoal. This is part of the disputed South China Sea. Beijing stakes a claim to the second Thomas Shoal, but Manila currently controls it. In recent years, Beijing has challenged Manila's claims. The Chinese have sent a large number of Coast Guard ships. They've engaged in a number of provocative actions, all of it near the second Thomas Shoal. They've rammed into Manila's ships. They've fired water cannons at them. The Chinese have tried to establish a blockade around this shipwreck, the Sierra Madre. This is a World War II era ship. It was deliberately marooned by the Philippines in the 1990s, mainly to assert its claims on the second Thomas Shoal. The Philippines has stationed Marines on it, on the shipwreck. They have Marines, and these Marines need supplies. So every now and then, Manila sends a boat or a ship with supplies for the soldiers. China has actively tried to block these missions, these supply missions. And Monday's events are a sign. The Chinese are resorting to more aggressive tactics. The same strategy that they've used with India on the Himalayan border. More aggression, more provocation. Since 2020, Indian and Chinese troops have clashed on more than one occasion in Ladakh. This is along the line of actual control, or LAC. And here too, the Chinese use sticks and rods to attack. Now they're doing the same with the Philippines and justifying it to boot.
The Philippines, in defiance of China's warnings, insisted on trespassing on Rinai Reef in China's Nansha Islands. This is the direct cause of the incident. The Chinese Coast Guard at the scene has taken professional law enforcement measures with restraint, which aimed at stopping the illegal supply mission by the Philippine vessels, and no direct measures were taken against the Philippine personnel.
They say they acted with restraint. If using knives and axes is restraint, what is excess? Where is the restraint in boarding naval ships without permission and then wrecking and looting them? The Philippines says only pirates do this. And we couldn't agree more. This is an act of aggression by China, and they don't seem to be interested in de-escalating tensions. Over the weekend, there was a fresh provocation. China introduced a new law. It gives the Chinese Coast Guard sweeping powers. It allows them to seize foreign ships and detain their crews. They can be kept in Chinese custody for up to 60 days, and that too without a trial. The Philippines is a clear target of this new law, and their president has issued a warning to China.
If by a willful act on a Filipino, not only serviceman, but even a Filipino citizen, if a Filipino citizen is killed by a willful act, that is, I think, very, very close to what we define as an act of war, and therefore we will respond accordingly.
If the Chinese Coast Guard arrests any Filipino, it will be like an act of war. That's how President Marcos Jr. sees it. And he has support from Washington. The U.S. has condemned the Chinese attack. They've called it, and I'm quoting, irresponsible and escalatory. The Americans have a defense treaty with the Philippines, a treaty that was signed in 1951. It's a mutual defense treaty. It says that if any one of them is attacked by a third party, both countries will help each other. And after the Chinese attack this week, Washington has reaffirmed its commitment to this pact.
It's reckless, and it threatens regional peace and stability. And finally, this escalatory incident is the latest in a series of provocations by the PRC to impede critically needed supplies from reaching service members stationed at the Sierra Madre, and those actions reflect consistent disregard for the safety of Filipino lives and for international law in the South China Sea.
Yesterday, Manila sent a message to Beijing urging China to avoid actions which endanger the lives of sailors. The Philippines says it wants a dialogue. But that cannot happen until Beijing dials down tensions on the high seas. The situation is still volatile. China needs to de-escalate and pull back its troops. Else, we are heading into another conflict at one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world. Speaking of which, let's turn to the war in Gaza. It's been almost 9 months now. In this time, Israel's position has been the same. We want to destroy the Hamas. That's what they've said throughout. We want to eliminate this group completely. But Israel's army says that's impossible. Look at what an army spokesperson said, and I'm quoting, "This business of destroying Hamas, it's simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a party. It's rooted in the hearts of the people. Whoever thinks we can eliminate Hamas is wrong." Now, this is a big statement. Israel's army says you cannot destroy Hamas. It's impossible. But that's not what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying. He kept telling the world that Israel would destroy Hamas, not once, not twice, but multiple times. Listen to this.
The elimination of Hamas is a necessary step to ensure that the day after there will be no element in Gaza that threatens us. We spoke about recent developments in the war, including Israel's commitment to achieving all of the war's objectives, eliminating Hamas.
To win this war, we must destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah.
The necessary goal of the war is first of all the elimination of Hamas. We will continue to fight until all the objectives of the war are achieved, and the priority is the elimination of Hamas.
So who should we trust, the Israeli military or the Israeli Prime Minister? As expected, the statement has triggered a controversy. Netanyahu's office has commented on it. They reiterated Israel's official war goal, to destroy Hamas. The military also released a clarification. They said that the spokesperson was talking about the Hamas ideology and not the group. But I'm afraid that the damage is done. The public spat has confirmed the obvious. There are divisions between Netanyahu and his military. We saw that earlier this week too. Israel's military announced a tactical pause in Rafah. Again, Netanyahu was not happy. He was totally opposed to any pause in fighting. Before that, the defense minister rebelled. He asked Netanyahu to plan for post-war Gaza. Again, the prime minister refused. And all of these developments confirmed the divisions. But the question is, what has caused it? There are three main reasons. The first one is tactical. Netanyahu wants his army to defeat Hamas in Rafah. But what comes after that? Who will govern the Gaza Strip? Without a plan, Israel could face insurgencies, and the army is not keen on that. They would like some clarity on the next step. The second reason is military support, mainly from the US. Netanyahu's policy has already enraged Washington. They have withheld one shipment of bombs. But what if more shipments are paused? Israel's army may run out of firepower, which brings us to the third reason, a second front in this war. At this rate, we cannot rule it out. Israel and Hezbollah are regularly exchanging fire, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Last week, Israel took out a senior Hezbollah commander. In response, they fired rockets at northern Israel. It's a very dangerous situation. On Wednesday, Israel's army released operational footage. It shows them striking 7 targets in Lebanon. Take a look at this. The Hezbollah says it's ready for war, and it's not just threatening Israel. It is threatening Cyprus too. Now, Cyprus is an island on the west of Lebanon. It has a defense agreement with Israel. Both sides have held joint drills in the past. Cyprus has also allowed Israel to use its airports. But all of that was during peacetime, not in the middle of a war. Nonetheless, Hezbollah is not taking any chances. They're warning Cyprus too.
If the war is imposed on Lebanon, the resistance will fight without control, without rules, and without a ceiling. Cyprus should be warned that opening Cypriot bases and airports to the Israelis to target Lebanon means that the Cypriot government has become part of the war. And the resistance will deal with Cyprus as if it is part of the war.
Cyprus has denied these claims. They say no military support is being given to Israel. But how serious is the Hezbollah threat? Well, the US is really concerned. This week, Joe Biden sent a special envoy to West Asia. In Beirut, he met Lebanon's parliament speaker, who is an ally of Hezbollah. The US official called for de-escalation at the border. But the problem seems to be Netanyahu. Hezbollah could have intervened any time in the last 9 months, but they did not. And what does that tell you? There is no appetite for war in Lebanon, not unless Israel escalates. And that's where Netanyahu's actions are worrying. Consider what he did with Iran. The regime in Tehran was watching from the sidelines, but Israel killed their top commanders in Syria. That's when Iran attacked Israel. And now Netanyahu is going after senior Hezbollah commanders. Again, the same agenda, to draw out this war and to keep the Americans interested. It's a very risky and dangerous strategy. But then again, that's been Netanyahu's game plan throughout. Vladimir Putin in Vietnam. He's gone there after visiting North Korea. It's the last leg of his Asia tour. Yesterday, like we told you, he was in North Korea. Today, the Russian president landed in Hanoi. The day started with a welcome ceremony. There were children waving flags, bands playing, even a 21-gun salute. Not as grand as Pyongyang, but it was quite big by Hanoi standards. After that, it was the business end of the visit. The main focus is their strategic partnership, and it's an old one. In fact, the oldest for Vietnam. Russia was the first country to sign a strategic partnership with Vietnam. They did it back in 2001. Putin was the leader of Russia then too in 2001, and now he's visiting to strengthen this partnership.
Russia attaches great importance to the issues of further strengthening the traditionally friendly Russian-Vietnamese comprehensive strategic relations, strategic partnership relations.
So Putin met Vietnamese leaders, he held multiple meetings, he talked about trade, signed deals on energy cooperation and discussed some international issues as well.
We also touched upon current international issues. I would like to emphasize that the positions of Russia and Vietnam largely coincide or are close.
That's the point that Putin is trying to drive home, that the West may be trying to isolate him, but he still has partners and friends. And Moscow's relationship with Hanoi goes back all the way to the 1950s, when Vietnam was a new communist state and Moscow gave it economic support, diplomatic recognition and military backing. Thousands of Vietnamese students studied in Soviet universities, including Nguyen Phu Trong. He's Vietnam's current Communist Party chief. Over the decades, Vietnam saw multiple wars and Moscow came to their rescue. It gave them fighter jets, tanks, helicopters, even soldiers, 11,000 of them. Even after the Soviet Union fell, the ties remained strong, and it shows everywhere. Take Hanoi's architecture, for example. Most old buildings have a Soviet touch. And not just that, Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum houses the body of its founding father, Ho Chi Minh. His preserved body is on display there, but every year the mausoleum is closed for 2 months. Do you know why? Because the embalmed body is flown to Russia for maintenance. Such is their relationship. It's a unique friendship, and a key aspect of it is military ties. Russia is Vietnam's largest military supplier. It accounts for 80% of Vietnam's armed exports. Nearly all of their naval vessels are from Russia. And defense remains the focus on this visit as well. Putin has arrived with his defense minister here, and while Vietnam's reliance on Russian weapons is significant, it is looking to diversify. And that's because of the fear of Western sanctions. In fact, this state visit was also condemned by the United States. So Vietnam doesn't want to take any chances. It is diversifying its sources. Which brings us to the country itself. Why Vietnam? Why did Putin choose Hanoi? And the answer is quite simple. Vietnam is like the new cool kid on the block. It's a rising economy, a manufacturing powerhouse, a leading exporter of goods, and for companies leaving China, it's one of the compelling alternatives. So everyone wants to be friends with Vietnam. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone. Last year, US President Joe Biden was in the country. The two nations upgraded their relations. Soon after that, Chinese President Xi Jinping followed. His was a grand visit too. And now it is Putin's turn. It's his 5th visit to Vietnam. So there's a clear pattern. Every country wants Vietnam in their corner. But who is Vietnam choosing? The answer is no one. They want to do business with everyone. And it's their age-old strategy. They call it bamboo diplomacy. It's inspired from the bamboo plant. Strong roots and flexible branches, bending in all directions. And Vietnam is keeping it quite flexible right now. They're keeping their options open, not isolating anyone, at the same time refusing to be tied up in alliances. It's a strategy that has paid off until now, and they do not plan to change it. This latest visit by Putin is proof. Meanwhile, guess who's complaining about terrorism? Pakistan. It's the mother of all ironies. They spent decades using terrorism as state policy, but now they have problems with it. Why? Because those same terrorists are attacking Pakistan. Let's look at the complaint first. It came from Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations. He was addressing a special meeting on weapons, especially small and light weapons. There he called for a campaign to recover arms from terror groups. There was special reference to one, the TTP, or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Let me quote from Islamabad's statement. Terrorists and criminals do not manufacture these arms. They acquire them from illicit arms markets or receive them from entities that want to destabilize a particular region or country. How about that? It's like one of those second-grade tests. The teacher has asked Pakistan to write an essay about itself, and this is the perfect answer: a country that gives weapons to destabilize another country. Pakistan has been doing it to India. Hundreds of Pakistani weapons have been found in Kashmir. They were used by terror groups to spread chaos. Was that not problematic? Back then, Islamabad said nothing. They kept funding and arming terrorists in Kashmir. So why the outrage now? Because this time, Pakistan is the victim. Let me tell you about the TTP, the group they're complaining about. It's a largely Pashtun terror group in Pakistan. It also has ties with the Afghan Taliban. They're sort of like ideological cousins. The TTP's fight is against the Pakistani state. They want to capture power. They want to run the country based on Sharia, basically replicate what happened in Kabul. And this group is on a roll. TTP attacks increased by 60%, 60, in the last 2 years. Almost 800 attacks were reported in 2023. They resulted in more than 1,500 deaths, many of them security personnel. And 2 provinces are the worst affected, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Together, they make up 84% of the attacks and 90% of all the deaths. And that tells a story, because both these provinces also border Afghanistan. Islamabad has asked Kabul to control the TTP, but the Taliban have refused to do it. They have given safe haven to TTP fighters near the border. They've also given them weapons. And not just any weapons, American weapons. When the US withdrew from Afghanistan, they left behind a lot of weapons, some $7 billion of arms. Reports say the TTP is using some of these American weapons. We're talking about deadly equipment here, like M16 machine guns and M4 assault rifles, which brings us to Pakistan's latest complaint. They're unable to handle this threat, so they want global support. An appeal was made in March as well. Pakistan used the United Nations Security Council to build pressure on Kabul. They said Afghanistan should rein in the TTP. But like I said, no luck. The world has more than enough on its plate. There are 2 major wars, a looming conflict in the South China Sea and a resurgent ISIS in Africa. So Pakistan's TTP problem is not on top of the agenda. Nonetheless, Islamabad will keep raising it. They are wooing investors from China and West Asia, but all of them are demanding security. They want their assets to be safe. So Pakistan's economy is also pinned on fighting the TTP. Plus, they need military aid. The US halted Pakistan's aid program in 2018. Some of it has been resumed under Joe Biden, but Pakistan's army will want more. All of this explains their decision to raise the issue at the United Nations. Pakistan wants to globalize the TTP problem. But again, two questions remain. Number one, will it work? Looks unlikely right now. Pakistan cultivated multiple terror groups to bleed its neighbors, whether it was India or Afghanistan. Now, those same terrorists are targeting Pakistan. It's a self-created problem. So Pakistan will get little sympathy. And question number two, will it make Pakistan change its policy on terrorism? Again, unlikely. Yesterday, 2 terrorists were killed in Kashmir. The Indian Army says both were Pakistani residents. They belong to the Lashkar-e-Toiba. And who supports the Lashkar-e-Toiba? The Pakistan government. So TTP or not, Islamabad will not change its ways. They will always have their good and bad terrorists.
Honest students suffer and students who want to cheat benefit.
Months of preparation, years of investments, and for some, a wait of a lifetime. That's what is at stake in India. I'm talking about the recent examination controversies. First was the NEET exam, a common test for medical courses. Now it's the NET exam. NET stands for National Eligibility Test. Say you want to become a professor at an Indian university or you're eyeing a research fellowship. Then NET is your ticket. Your success depends on your NET score. This year's exam was held on Tuesday. Almost 900,000 candidates appeared for the test. 9 lakh. It was organized across 317 cities. But guess what? That exam has been cancelled. Why? Listen to India's Education Ministry.
On the 19th of June, the UGC got some inputs from the Home Ministry's Cybercrimes Department. From those inputs, the Education Ministry realized that there's a chance that the examination may have been compromised. We took prompt action by cancelling the examination to protect the interest of students.
There was a tip-off from the cyber cell, a possibility that the exam paper was leaked. Later, the Education Minister confirmed this. He said the question paper was leaked on the dark web. So the NET exam was cancelled. And what happens next? Well, the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation, is investigating this case. Meanwhile, another exam will be conducted at a later date, which means more delay, more public expenditure, and more tension for the candidates. But this problem goes beyond just NET. We've told you about the NEET controversy. It has 2 different parts. First is about the grace marks. The NEET exam started late in some locations. The students said we did not get enough time, so the testing agency came up with a solution. Grace marks for more than 1,500 students. More than 1,500 students received these extra marks. Not everyone is happy about it. Some students called it unfair. They filed complaints in courts across India, so the testing agency backpedaled. They've offered to retest these students, a retest instead of the grace marks. That's the first issue. The second issue is paper leaks. This investigation, the paper leak investigation in NEET, is happening in the state of Bihar. 4 men have been arrested so far. They say they got the NEET question paper 1 day before. If true, this is massive and very serious. NEET is the first step towards becoming a doctor in India, so fraud is not just unethical, it's a matter of life and death. More than 2.4 million students took this test. All of them are in a state of limbo now. As expected, this controversy has become political. Today, a few students met Congress leader Rahul Gandhi. Afterwards, he blamed the BJP for this fiasco.
This is extremely damaging to students, and it's happening because all our institutions have been captured Our vice chancellors are placed not based on merit, but because they belong to a particular organization. And this organization and the BJP have penetrated our education system and destroyed it. What was done by Mr. Narendra Modi to the economy with demonetization has now been done to the education system.
Let's focus on two questions now. One, how do these papers leak? And two, how can it be stopped? Now, most of these standardized tests are organized by the NAT, the National Testing Agency. It was set up in 2017. It works under the Union Ministry of Education. The NAT organizes a lot of elite exams, like the JEE, the NEET, and the NET. Now, put together, their exams affect 10 million students in India. And the government is now cracking down on them. Today, the Education Minister spoke to the media. He said a high-level panel will investigate affairs at the National Testing Agency. He also said the culprits would not be spared.
I want to assure you that after the investigation, the culprits will be strictly punished, whether it's the NTA or some high-ranking official at the NTA. We will take recommendations from a high-level panel on reforming NTA structure, functioning, examination process, transparency and security protocol.
Now we come to the leaks. How do they happen? Many people are involved in making question papers, in drafting, in checking, in publishing, in transporting, and in distributing, so the paper can be leaked at any of these stages. All it takes is one corrupt official. So the problem is not political, it is systemic. Which brings us to the second question. How can we stop it? This year, the Indian Parliament passed a new law, sort of like an anti-paper leak law. And what does it do? It calls for strict punishment in case of leaks. Say someone has used unfair means to take an exam. If convicted, they face strict punishment. 3 to 5 years in jail plus a fine of up to 10 lakh rupees, which is around 12,000 US dollars. But sometimes these leaks are not organized by one person. They're done by a group, in which case the punishment is stricter, between 5 and 10 years in jail, plus a minimum fine of 1 crore rupees. Which is $112,000. So the law is very clear on leaking papers, yet it doesn't seem to have stopped. Reports say there have been 41 paper leaks in the last 5 years. They have affected 1.4 crore applicants. When a paper leaks, it sets off a chain of events. The retest is delayed, the admission is delayed, the academic session is delayed, and public money is wasted. Not to mention, exam integrity is lost. So the government needs to get a grip on this. Normally, students pass or fail in exams, but this time the system has failed. And do spare a thought for the students. Imagine what they go through. The tension, the uncertainty, the anxiety, we can't even begin to comprehend it. So the government must remember the mental toll on students, because every time a paper leaks, their dreams are dashed. So retest is not the best solution. The root problem must be addressed. What is India's biggest asset? One of it is its strategic location. India is surrounded by water on 3 sides: the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. This gives India access to the world's most significant trade route. 65% of India's trade comes through the sea. And India needs more ports to fully leverage this potential. In recent years, India has taken major steps to improve its ports. The capacity at least 12 ports has been doubled. And now New Delhi is about to embark on its most ambitious project yet. India is gearing up to build its biggest seaport. Our next report tells you more.
A world-class port inside one of India's biggest trading and financial hubs. The plan was in the works for a while. Yesterday, the Indian cabinet finally pulled the trigger.
This port has the potential to be among the top 10 ports in the entire world. That's the significance of this port.
The project is an ambitious one. It's worth well over $9 billion. The Vadhavan port will be built here, in the Indian state of Maharashtra. The state already has the Jawaharlal Nehru Port, or JNPT. That's India's second largest container port, but Vadhavan will be bigger. Not only will it take the load off the JNPT, but this new port will significantly improve India's capacities. On paper, the project seems promising. This will be an all-weather port, meaning it will operate all year round, unaffected by the weather. In terms of capacity, the port will handle 298 million tons of containers. That's the same as thousands of football fields. This will significantly enhance India's ability to handle large cargo. One major advantage is the location of the port. Vadhavan will be able to serve two important trade corridors. The ambitious India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. This is a proposed trade route which will connect India to Europe through the UAE. It will also be able to serve the International North-South Transportation Corridor, or INSTC. India, Russia and Iran had started this trade initiative. It can simplify India's access to 4 regions, Northern and Western Europe, as well as Central Asia and Eurasia. Today, at least 13 countries are members of the INSTC. This trade initiative was signed in the early 2000s, but its full potential is yet to be unlocked. The Vadhavan port will play an instrumental role towards that. Due to its location on India's west coast, the port can serve as an important trade hub for the Arabian Sea. It will be able to handle container traffic from Africa's east coast as well as from countries in the Persian Gulf. It will also be well connected to key Indian cities and highways. The Vadhavan port will be built just 140 kilometers from India's financial capital, Mumbai. For those wishing to send cargo to Delhi, the Delhi-Mumbai freight corridor is barely 34 kilometers away from Vadhavan. The development of India's coastline is a long overdue goal. India is surrounded by the sea on 3 sides, so more ports could help India unlock new trade opportunities. They can also provide valuable strategic support in the event of an emergency. The maritime sector accounts for 95% of India's trade volume. So these ports are not just beneficial for the economy, they are a necessity.
Now let's talk about the UK, about their embattled Prime Minister Rishi Sonak. He's facing an election on the 4th of July, exactly 2 weeks from now, and the predictions are dire. Sonak's Conservative Party, also known as the Tory Party, is facing a row. That's what opinion polls say. They're looking at their worst defeat since 1997, when they were reduced to 165 seats. This time, the Tories could struggle to hit triple digits. That's according to some recent polls. And what's worse, Sonak may lose his own seat, the seat of Richmond. That's what one opinion poll is predicting anyway. And if this happens, if Sonak loses his seat, it would be a disaster for him. It would be the first time in British history that a sitting Prime Minister would have lost their seat. And this constituency is a Conservative Party stronghold. The Tories or Unionists have held it since 1910. That's 114 years. So as you can see, Rishi Sonak is staring at a disaster, which may be why he pulled a strange move. Sonak seems to be taking inspiration from his roots, his Indian roots. Look at this social media post. The message is simple: buy British. Now, every Indian knows this sentiment. It goes back to India's freedom struggle, to Mahatma Gandhi and his famous Swadeshi movement. That's why it looks like Sonak is going back to his roots. He's at risk of being ousted by the British, so he's taking inspiration from a man who routed the Brits instead. It's certainly a unique campaign strategy, trying to get Britain to go Swadeshi. And it has led to some hilarious reactions on social media. But there's a small problem here. Britain hasn't been self-reliant in food for centuries. Remember colonialism? The British Empire where the sun did not set. Do you remember how it started? It was with the East India Company coming to India for tea and spices and eventually everything else. This was how Britain built an empire, but it also had a side effect. Indigenous British food was supplanted by food from around the world. Centuries of mooching off foreign lands can do that. Now, this wasn't really a bad thing for the UK, especially when you think of what traditional British cuisine is: fish and chips, beans on toast, and turnips. We are drawing a blank on other examples. Because for years, no one had to remember the bland stuff. The British themselves had swapped their boring diet for plates of chicken tikka masala, which had become their national dish. So colonialism brought the British some flavor, but now along comes Rishi Sonak with his Buy British movement. What will this mean? Will the British go back to fish and chips? If yes, then how? Because fresh fish may be a bit hard to catch these days. The British rivers are filthy now because of all the raw sewage being released into them. So perhaps fish and chips is a non-starter. How about the turnips then? Will the humble root be able to fight back against modern British taste buds? Again, non-British vegetables like tomatoes. The Tories tried convincing people to do this last year, swapping turnips for tomatoes. It did not really work. But it seems that Sunak is having another go, rebranding the turnip push as buying British. But jokes aside, it seems like Rishi Sonak is flailing, trying every strategy in the book in the hopes that something sticks and quells public anger. But the problem is, his Conservative Party, the Tories, are to blame for a lot of Britain's current problems. Sunak says buying British will help local farmers, but his own party undermined the same farmers by signing questionable free trade agreements. And of course, Brexit. Brexit upended Britain's agricultural sector and farmers are still trying to recover. Considering all this, Sunak's Buy British movement may have a hard time getting off the ground, and he may not really care if it does. Because let's face it, there are 2 weeks to go for the election. The Tories are staring at a rout, so Sunak may not have to come up with a Swadeshi action plan anyway, which is almost a shame. Because if nothing else, Indians would have loved to see Sunak spreading Mahatma Gandhi's teachings in the UK. Staying with very British problems, let's turn our attention to the Euros. Europe's premier football tournament is on right now. It is taking place in Germany. Fans from across the continent have descended upon Deutschland. Now, there are normal football fans, the ones who just love the game, who support their national team and are just there to have a good time. Then there are the ultras, the hooligans, who want to drink, get rowdy and cause some chaos. England is known for both sets of fans, but the hooligans are the ones making the headlines again for a distasteful song, which they sing to rile up the Germans. Here's our report.
Football is called the beautiful game for the technical ability on offer, and for sentimental reasons too, like its ability to bring joy and unite people. But sadly, that's never all that it brings. Where you have football, you have hooligans. This is almost always the case, especially during international tournaments. Like the ongoing Euros. Sometimes jingoism takes over during these tournaments, and what you have are crass displays. This is especially true for a section of English football fans, and specifically when it comes to Germany, one of England's long-time rivals. Since the 1980s, English hooligans have sung a distasteful song, a chant that refers to World War II. You hear it every time the English face the Germans, or the ultras or die-hard fans think of Germans, or go to Germany for a football match, and this time is no different. It's called 10 German Bombers, a reference to the German Air Force and English counterattacks. The song brings back bad memories for the Germans, so for years, people have been trying to stop the English fans from singing it. The German police made an appeal. The British Prime Minister, Rishi Sonak, made one as well. But the English hooligans didn't care. They were belting out the song during England's first Euro match, which wasn't even against Germany. It was against Serbia. But the ultras couldn't care less. They sang 10 German bombers while in the city of Gelsenkirchen, a city which the UK and the Allies bombed almost to oblivion during World War II. So why do they insist on singing it? Here's their standard response.
Just let us get on with it, really. It's just banter, isn't it? At the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. It's just banter. It's just one of our songs that we like to sing, you know? We don't have no hate as such. It's just part of our song choice.
behind the back. And
But is it banter or simply offensive? For most English fans, 10 German bombers does cross the line.
You can understand it from a German point of view. It's just it's a lax respect, really, especially when you're over here. You're trying to mix in with their culture as much as you can. So yeah, it probably is a song that people sing it, but probably isn't the right thing to do.
Sadly, the hooligans don't follow this logic, even though England have been on the receiving end, like in 2022, after the British Queen Elizabeth II died. Back then, football fans from former British colonies had a thing or two to say. It was distasteful, and the British media reacted with disgust. Maybe if the English ultras remembered that incident, they would empathize with the Germans. Football chants can add an amazing atmosphere to games. The English themselves have come up with a number of classics, or they've rewritten actual classics to suit the mood. A favorite is Three Lions, Football's Coming Home, a song that highlights the British dream, that they'll finally win a major tournament again. There's also Southgate, You're the One, a remastered version of a song by Atomic Kitten. It's a tribute to the English manager, Gareth Southgate. Then you have songs that are used to laud players, like Hey Jude by the Beatles, sung in tribute to the English midfielder Jude Bellingham. English fans have a ton of great options if they want to show support, and most fans do stick to these songs. Hopefully, their example will rub off on the ultras.
Now let's turn our attention to Islam's holiest city, Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, where nearly 2 million Muslims began the Hajj pilgrimage last week. But as they reached the end yesterday, for many, the journey proved fatal. The heat has been unrelenting. Temperatures have reached 51.8 degrees Celsius and more than 1,000 Hajj pilgrims have lost their lives. This includes people who travel from across the world, including at least 68 Indians who have died.
Yesterday we were on our way and we saw corpses on the road. They were covered with a white sheet because the temperatures here are really high. And I'm not just talking about old people, young people have died too. It was a very hard day because of the extreme heat. A lot of people died. The ambulances were overwhelmed. You would talk to someone and suddenly they would die.
Unregistered pilgrims made up more than half of the deaths. Without cooling or healthcare resources, they perished in the intense heat. And that's not all. Thousands of others suffered from heat exhaustion. Close to 3,000 cases were reported on Sunday alone. Now, hot weather is not new for Mecca. It has almost always seen a hot climate, and this has not bothered the Hajj in the past, which has been conducted in the same way for centuries now. But global warming is making the heat severe, and the infrastructure can't seem to keep up. Scientists say that by 2040, Hajj is going to be fatal. And it won't be an isolated scenario. By 2050, India will be among the first places on earth where temperatures cross survivability limits. And we can already see the signs. North India is reeling under a prolonged heat wave. Since March, 40,000 cases of heat stroke have been reported. At least 110 people have died, and the capital, Delhi, has seen a punishing summer. Daily temperatures are crossing 40 degrees Celsius and peaking at nearly 50 degrees. There are water shortages and power outages. This week, electricity demand reached an all-time high. Climate change is causing the current infrastructure to fail. In some cases, it is making deadly heat waves 35 times more likely. Like in the case of the United States, much of the country is sweltering. There's a record-breaking heat wave. 75 million people are under extreme heat alerts. That is 1 in 5 people.
We want to be clear. This is extremely hot for June, and New Yorkers should not underestimate the heat. with climate change leading to more frequent and intense heat. Summers are different than they were before, and so we should expect and be prepared for the hot weather that is coming. If this is an indication, we're just starting out the summer months. We can only expect even more as the summer continues to move forward.
Indeed, we can. No continent is safe from extreme heat. Look at Europe. It is the fastest warming continent on Earth. Here, temperatures are rising at twice the global average. Greece is among the worst affected. It is witnessing the earliest heat wave on record, which has warranted school closures, restrictions, and even caused deaths. France is in the same boat. It is braving an early heat wave, which is worrying because the Olympic Games will be held in Paris next month. The last Summer Olympics in Tokyo were the hottest in history, with temperatures reaching 32 degrees. Paris is expected to break the record. Now, I know 32 degrees does not seem like much. For many countries, this barely qualifies as dangerous. But it is. In June, summer has barely begun for France. So Paris temperature should be between 14 to 24 degrees Celsius. That is the average. But this year, it has already crossed 30 degrees. The sudden increase can seem unbearable because, like most countries, France does not have the infrastructure to deal with such abnormal heat, meaning there could be a shortage of resources, additional stress on healthcare systems, heat-related illnesses, and even deaths. So the examples are everywhere. Heat is breaking record after record, and nations are baking. What are the governments doing about it? They're asking people to drink more water, not much else. Despite their promises, fossil fuel use has broken the global record. Under their watch, satellites like Elon Musk's Starlink are damaging the atmosphere. They're burning the ozone layer. So this is the gist of the matter. Governments have chosen delusion over action. We are not prepared for the future, while climate change chips away at our present. It is a catastrophe in the making. The weekend is almost here. Do you have any interesting plans? If it's a dingle day, maybe you can go out and meet some friends. If not, you can catch up on some gonk. Much needed fod plod could be a good choice as well. If you understand what I mean, then you're part of an exclusive club of linguists. I'm referring to the researchers in Antarctica. Antarctica is the coldest and one of the least inhabited continents in the world. It has only a few settlements made up of scientists and support staff. And they're so isolated from the rest of the world that their accents are changing, and now they're even speaking a whole new language. Here's a report.
This is Antarctica, a bleak, dark and remote place. This is the coldest continent on the planet, also the least inhabited, the only continent with no permanent human habitation. But this doesn't mean that Antarctica has no humans. It does have some settlements in the form of research stations. There are only a handful of bases. They are scattered across the 14 million square kilometer frozen landscape, and they are a temporary home to scientists and support staff. They live in Antarctica for some parts of the year, usually on a rotating basis. During this time, they brave the conditions, they work, eat and socialize while almost totally cut off from the world. And this changes how they speak. A new study is out, a world-first study into colloquial Antarctic language, and it shows that the so-called winterers have developed their own language. It's a unique colloquialism with a baffling array of words that won't make much sense to anyone who's not a regular in Antarctica. Instead of sleep, people say gonk. Instead of cleaning, they say gash. A clear blue sky day becomes dingle day, and picking up rubbish is called fod plod. These are only a few of many such words. They sound bizarre, but we aren't making this up. This language cropped up as happenstance. There's not much science behind it, except some logic. For instance, the fod in fod plod refers to foreign object debris. Well, you can trust a scientist to come up with that. There's another fascinating development. Amid all this conversing, people's accents are changing. During their stint in Antarctica, people have limited entertainment. They mostly only talk to each other. To speak to anyone in the outside world, satellite phone calls are required, which are quite expensive and are mostly avoided. And when the winterers talk to each other, something primitive happens. They memorize each other's speech, which influences their own speech production. Research bases in Antarctica consist of people from across the world. The common language is English, but the accents differ. So speakers infect each other with their pronunciations. Now, this is known to us through an Antarctic study. This experiment is the first of its kind. But the result is not entirely surprising. It has happened innumerable times throughout history. As groups of people become cut off from others, their accents, dialects, and languages diversify. This tells us why American English differs from British English. On a larger scale, this still happens in many cities where multiple cultures come together to produce their own dialects and accents. We see this in Europe due to its high levels of migration. For instance, over the past few years, a new kind of German is being spoken in Berlin. A new Swedish dialect is emerging in Stockholm as well. And this is bound to happen, which is also what makes language fun. It's not only fluid, but uniting. So, no matter how disconnected Antarctica remains, it retains linguistic traits with the world.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un gifts Russian President Putin a pair of dogs as the two bond over animals. Climate protesters spray paint on private jets in the UK, and Germany traffic light signals get a facelift, courtesy the Euros. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 2001, General Pervez Musharraf was formally sworn in as Pakistan's president. This was after he removed then President Rafiq Tarar. This happened 2 years after Musharraf seized power from Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in a military coup. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.